I'm continuing my match fishing memories series today by stopping talking about the nationals for a little while, and I want to go back 40 years to try and answer a question that match anglers often ask. Can you win off a bad peg? Match anglers argue that if you won off a peg that's supposedly a bad peg, it wasn't really a bad peg, it must have been a good peg. And that's probably true most of the time. Mostly people know the potential of a swim on even on a river or a still water, and even on a commercial. There are good pegs, bad pegs, sometimes absolutely brilliant pegs, what we call a flyer. And I have to say that in the hundreds of matches I fished, it was extremely rare to say I did really well off a bad peg, and even rarer to say I won off a genuinely bad peg. But 40 years ago, early in the season, I went, as I often did, to stay with relatives at Wolvercote near Oxford for a week's holiday. And when I had these holidays, they could be a week or a fortnight, I'd often go back in September as well. I would buy a permit for the local club, and in those days the most local club to Wolvercote was the North Oxford Angling Society, and you also needed a card for the Oxford and District AA, ODAA. Nowadays you can just buy a ticket for an affiliate club like Littlemore Angling Society, and that gives you the ODAA water as well as Littlemore's waters. But in those days, because it did change quite a few times over the years, you bought the North Oxford book and you then had to buy the ODAA card as well. It wasn't very much money. And I bought this on a Friday evening. I must have left work sort of 4 o'clock, got home, jumped in the car with all my fishing gear and suitcase of clothes for the week, and sped off up to Oxford. And back then, tackle shops would usually open fairly late on a Friday night, quite often till 8 or 9 o'clock, and the local match anglers would be in there buying their bait and talking about the prospects. And I bought my North Oxford book for the week on the season on the Friday. Charlbury is a little tiny village on the River Evenlode, and this was an inter-club match, but it wasn't a proper team match. It wasn't a selected 10 or anything like that. It was just anyone turned up, and it was a 50 pegger, and I don't think you had to have a ticket. You could just turn up at the draw, and it was at a venue called Carrots Ham. Well, I was used to fishing on Medley. I knew where Godstow was, that was right near Wolvercote, and I didn't really know where Carrots Ham was. The membership book didn't really have any maps or anything like that, just said sort of Carrots Ham, Godstow, Oxford Canal, Duke's Cut, Duke's Lakes, stuff like that. So I still thought, yeah, I want to fish this. The next day I went fishing on Medley, fished a stick float and casters, hempen caster, and had a lovely bag of fish. I had around about 15 pounds, some nice roach, plenty of them, a few chub, nothing special, but netters, maybe 1 or 2 perch and bleak, gudgeon. Nice mixed bag on the stick float. Still didn't know where the draw was for Carrots Ham. That evening, the Saturday night, I went fishing at Wolvercote Lake, which is a pond of 2 or 3 acres that was available on day ticket back in those days. And it was quite good tench fishing. It was quite common to catch between 4 and 10 tench, between 3 and 4 pounds. Very nice fishing. And when I was just about to pack up, a young lad came round. I said, "You don't know where this Carrots Ham is? I got a match there in the morning, 6 o'clock draw." So here we are, 10 o'clock the night before. I've got all my kit's all right. I've got bait for the morning. And he said, "Oh yeah, go to Whiteham. And when you get over the little bridge over the Seacourt stream, instead of following the bend round to the left, go to the right. On that bend, there's a little junction there. Go down there. There's the University Field Station. where they study Whiteham Woods, and you'll see people park in there and just follow the crowd, and you'll get to the riverbank. You cross over the sea court and follow it up to the riverbank at Carrots Ham, which was the stretch above King's Lock and King's Weir. So next morning I turned up, drew my peg, didn't have a clue what that meant. As it happened, the angler on the next swim sort of knew me, and I must have bumped into him on the riverbank once or twice when I've been fishing around Godstow, maybe the year before. And he was the match secretary, and he drew at the upstream end of about 40 yards of pipe reeds, and I was at the downstream end, so we had a long distance between me and him. The pegging was quite good. It was a 50 peg match, but I had a good 25 yards below me as well, so fairly straight bit of river, no features on the far bank to speak of, maybe the odd clump of reeds, but no overhanging trees or anything like that. And I didn't really know what to do, so I went and asked this guy, I can't remember his name. I said, what sort of depth is on the stick float line? He said 6 foot, and he gave me a very sort of funny look, and I thought, okay. So I went back and set my stick float at about 5 or 6 foot, didn't plumb the depth. And to fish this swim, I had to get down the bank, and at the bottom there was about a foot of water for about 3 foot, and then it went off deep. And I got down there, got the keep net in, bait stand, and hempen casters. The whistle went, and I baited up with probably a single caster on a 20, flicked out the stick float, a pretty steady flow, gentle, very gentle, it wasn't stationary, but it wasn't whipping through. Chucked it out about 3 rod lengths. The float went a yard, and it just bobbed down, 2 pound chub. I thought, that's not a bad start. I put a few casters in. Cast in again, did the same again. I thought, 2 pound chub, first 5 minutes. 15 minutes later, I got another one, about 1.5 pounds. And I'm noticing when I'm playing this chub that when it's going down deep, the float's going sort of outside. It's obviously deeper than 6 foot, not touching the bottom or anything. So I put it up a little bit deeper. And about 20 minutes later, I got another one, maybe a couple of pounds or so. And by then I'd discovered, or after that, I figured out the swim was actually 12 foot deep, and I started fishing 12 foot deep. And I plugged away, and I'd caught a few little gudgeon, little tiny perch, nothing very much. And towards the end, someone came up the bank and he said, what you got? I said, I got about 10 pound. He said, oh, that's a very good weight. No one's caught much. And I thought, well, maybe I should try shallower again. So I shallowed up, and I caught another chub of about 12 or 14 ounces. So I'm thinking I got maybe 11 pounds. Anyway, the scales came up, and I got just over 9 pounds, because these chub were quite hollow. It's early season, and they didn't go what I thought. Nowadays you get chub on the Thames and they're tremendously deep and fat, but these were thin and hollow. Typical sort of June chub really, but back in those days they were thin. We got to the results, and I'd walk the match. I'd say £9.2, second weight's about £5.2, another £5, £4.5. And I couldn't believe it. One or two of the locals were sort of saying, who is he? Who's that bloke? And my accent isn't it's not a local Oxford accent at all. I was a bit more Dorset. And they said, are you a member? I said, yeah, dug out my permit. I said, look, I joined on Friday. One or two had another swear at me. I've been trying to win this cup for 30 years. I've never won it. I said, oh, well, luck of the draw. Anyway, during that week, I carried on pleasure fishing on the Thames, having some good fishing. I didn't go back to Carrots Ham or anything. And the local tackle dealer, Steve Johnson, where I'd bought my permit, he said, "Oh, we've got a match against North Oxford. We're Oxford area anglers," which was a match group that he'd helped set up back 40 odd years ago. We're fishing against North Oxford, but this time we're on the Seacourt stream, which is the bit that you cross to get to the draw. It comes off the Thames at Carrottsham, makes its way down to through Wytham and then down to Botley, and then carries on and eventually joins like the Hinksey stream and comes back into the Thames again, sort of a side stream. And there were plenty of fish in there. There was some chub in there, even a few barbel, perch, plenty of dace, bleak, gudgeon, roach, odd bream. Just a nice, interesting water, but not very wide. 5 to 10 yards wide. Up to, there were 1 or 2 deep holes, sort of 10 foot deep, but mostly it was between about 1 foot and 3 foot deep. And I'd fished it even a decade before. When I was a kid, I'd got an North Oxford ticket and fished it a few times. Nice, interesting little water. They said, "Will you fish for us against North Oxford?" I said, "Yeah, I'm still here on Sunday. That's my last day. Then I'm going home Sunday night. I'm going back to work on the Monday." Okay, the draw's at the same place we were last, or not quite the same place, but on the Seacourt stream this time. But part where you did last week. Okay, I'll see you then. So I got to the draw, and again it's a 50 pegger. It's a decent sized match, and this time I'm turning out for Oxford area anglers, and I put my hand in the, drew out peg 5. Now, 1 or 2 of the anglers had obviously sort of said hello the week before, and the guy who was pegging out, he said, "Well, you're not going to win this week. Peg 5 is the worst peg on the whole stretch." He said, "I've pegged it out." He said, "It's about 1 foot deep, full of weed. I've had to put it in because I've had to get 50 pegs on the Seacourt stream, which is a lot of pegs, and you're just not going to win. It's a pound of bits." And I was a little bit, I suppose, affronted really, a bit defensive. And I said, "Well, I've paid my money, I've drawn my peg, I'm going to go and fish it. I've got no other choice. I can either go somewhere else on the main river, or I can see what I can do with this peg." And he said, "Oh, fair enough, but don't blame me when you don't catch much." Okay. So I traipsed up the field. So peg 1 was the first one off the Thames, and that was a pool. And then peg 2 had a nice little run. I can't remember 3 and 4. They looked quite tasty. And then it came to this straight bit, 100 yards or more, between 1 foot and 18 inches deep, and about halfway down there was my peg, 1 foot deep, weed all the way across, and right under the far bank there was a little run about this wide. And you couldn't see the bottom there, but you could see the bottom in places. You couldn't see any fish. So I thought, if I set up a tiniest stick float I've got, which is about 3 number 4, and run some casters under that far bank, maybe there's a chub hiding under there. Maybe I can do it. Couldn't see any other way of fishing it at all. So I started, the whistle went, I started fishing, and I started fishing under this far bank. I'm not catching anything, nothing, no sign of fish, no chub. Not very good. And after about half an hour, some of the casters must have been floating, and they floated down about 50 yards. I started seeing these little rises right down the bottom of the straight. At the bottom of the straight, they went round a bend, and then there was quite a nice swim. Peg 6 wasn't bad at all. And these rises weren't chub, they were just little bleak and little dace, and they were coming up the river. And I thought, oh yeah. And I thought, maybe I can catch a few of those bleak, but it's so weedy. So what I did was, I only had wellies on, didn't have waders, but it was so shallow close in, I could get about 1 yard out from the bank without getting a welly full. And I set my landing net pole with a little weed hook on it, and I got out there and I cut a little channel down through. And then I, back in those days, had a Garbolino SLV pole, which had a rig for elastic, but also had a flick tip. And I set that up at 7 foot, so just over 2 meters, with some fine line, a very small canal float, taking a number 8 and a number 10 and a 22 hook. And these bleak, I started to fish maggots. Bleak came into range and I started to pick up a few bleak and the odd dace. And I started to enjoy myself. I was getting the occasional gudgeon. And this went on. And the longer I fed it, only feeding quite light, the more fish came into the swim. And the more fish that were there, the more it was sort of competing. I was getting more bleak, the odd roach. And I was, like I say, I enjoyed myself. And then I sort of think, I need a second line. So took the landing net pole again, put the weed hook on again, waded out as far as I could, cut another channel a bit further out, and I got another pole. Bear in mind, this is days of glass poles. And I had a bleak whip that was about 11 or 12 foot. So it's probably about 11 foot. And I set an identical rig to the first one, same little canal float, 8 and a 10 and a 22. And now I could alternate between these two little runs. And when I'd cut the weed, as all this crap goes down the river and it stirs the bottom up a bit, but that's bringing more fish in, more gudgeon, more roach, still getting these bleak. And we got to less than an hour to go, and Steve Johnson came up the bank with a couple of the other anglers, and they said, "Oh, hello Mark, how you doing?" I said, "I've had probably got about £5 now." They told me it was worth £1, but I'm really having a enjoyable time. I'm catching fish, and they're all just small stuff, the odd little roach and gudgeon and stuff, dace, bleak. They said, "Well, top weight's not £5. If you got £5 and you're still catching, you got a chance of winning this." I said, "You're joking. What about all the chub pegs? They've all blown out. Every last chub peg has blown out." Well, right coming up to the very end, I got 2 skimmers about like this. They're not very big, 7 inches, 8 inches skimmers. And a bream came in the swim about £2. And by then I'm fishing a 24 hook. And I hooked this bream about £2. Not a hope. It just zoomed up river, broke me. I was very 12-ounce bottoms. So that was the one that got away. And eventually the match finished. I've carried on catching right to the end despite losing this bream. And they came down with the scales and had just under 6.5 pounds. And I'm thinking, I'm pleased with that. Just to have beaten the swim. It was me versus the swim. It wasn't me versus the rest. I didn't care about anyone else. And for the second week running, somehow I'd pinched the match. I'd got £6, 7.5. Next weight 5.2. Next weight 5.1. £5, 4.14, 4.12. I said, what happened with all these £5 weights? Well, they've all got 2 chub and nothing to go with it, or just a couple of bleak to go with it. About 3 of them had lost 3 or 4 chub. So every chub fly had been blown really. They'd had a bit of a result, but not a full result. And I was not that popular the second week, but it sticks in my mind as one of the best wins I ever had in all the matches I fished. It wasn't the biggest match I won, and I've broken match records and won matches with probably better performances. It was very simple fishing, 2 whips, but I stuck at it very, very hard and somehow extracted a weight way over what that swim was worth. It was worth £1 really, but not that week. I went back just as a tailpiece to that match. I went back in the September for a week, and they had another match on the sea court, and I drew peg 2 and I caught about £3. And to show the normal form of the sea court, about £17 won, £15 was second, £14 was third, £13 was fourth, £12 was fifth. Those were the weights that should have come out back in the summer but didn't. So a not very good peg on a bad day and a good result from it. Just once in a while you can get away with it and win off a genuinely bad peg. That's it for this episode. I'm not quite sure what the next one will be about. I'll need to look at winter leagues and opens and go back to nationals again and watching nationals, watching top anglers. So there's plenty more to talk about yet. Until then, it's goodbye for now.